Hi, it's Nico. With all the year-end reviews and book award ceremonies, I didn't do a dedicated December wrap-up video. But there are 3 books worth talking about, so I will add them to my January wrap-up. And at the end of this video, I will share what I have in mind for February. Moll Flanders is a novel by Daniel Defoe, first published in 1722, and 2022 was its 300th anniversary. I read Defoe's A Journal of the Plague Year at the beginning of the year, which also celebrated its 300th anniversary. The title page includes this summary of Moll Flanders' life. So this book is a record of the fortunes and misfortunes of the famous Moll Flanders, who was born in Newgate and during a life of continued variety for 70 years, besides her childhood, was 12 years a whore, 5 times a wife, whereof once to her own brother, 12 years a thief, 8 years a transported felon in Virginia, at last grew rich, lived honest, and died a penitent. Written from her own memorandums. As I listened to this fictional autobiography, I really couldn't decide what Defoe's purpose was. At various points, the novel gives moral lessons. For example, after telling how a gentleman slept with a prostitute and gets robbed after much alcohol, Moll Flanders pleads directly to the readers. Gentlemen, you really shouldn't get drunk and walk about the city alone. Look at the consequences. You could have got sex diseases and have passed it on to your wife, and you could have lost your gold, your honor, and your life. But at other points, the novel teaches in detail how to cheat, how to steal in shops, how to steal people's watches in a crowd, how to fall and escape the police when caught, all without consequences. She always gets away with it. On its Wikipedia page, there is a small line saying, historically, the book was occasionally the subject of police censorship. I am not surprised. 3 Men in a Boat, to say nothing of the dog, was published in 1889. It's a humorous account by English writer Jerome K. Jerome of a 2-week boating holiday on the Thames from Kingston upon Thames to Oxford and back to Kingston. I borrowed it from my local library and liked it so much that I bought my own copy from a charity shop. Just look at that cover. Going on boat trips was a popular pastime during the Victorian era. I love this painting, especially people's outfits. I love how people seem to mostly wear light colors, men and women. According to Wikipedia, the book was initially intended to be a serious travel guide with accounts of local history along the route, but the humorous elements took over to the point where the serious and somewhat sentimental passages seem a distraction to the comic novel. Honestly, it is a bit silly, but it really suited my mood after Christmas. I was exhausted with all the cooking and hosting, and the book was a perfect way to wind down. I loved listening to 3 men in a boat lying in front of a fire and giggling hysterically. I'll read you one glorious example of putting up a tent in the rain. I have some experience camping and putting up a tent myself, which means I know how realistic the description is, how angry people can get at the time, but hilarious when look back at it. It is evening, you are wet through, and there is a good 2 inches of water in the boat, and all the things are damp. You find a place on the banks that is not quite so puddly as other places you have seen, and you land and lug out the tent, and 2 of you proceed to fix it. It is soaked and heavy, and it flops about, and tumbles down on you, and clings around your head, and makes you mad. The rain is pouring steadily down all the time. It is difficult enough to fix a tent in dry weather. In wet, the task becomes Herculean. Instead of helping you, it seems to you that the other man is simply playing the fool. Just as you get your side beautifully fixed, he gives it a hoist from his end and spoils it all. Here, what are you up to? You call out. What are you up to? He retorts. Let go, can't you? Don't pull it. You've got it all wrong, you stupid ass, you shout. No, I haven't, he yells back. Let go your side. I tell you you've got it all wrong, you roar, wishing that you could get at him. And you give your ropes a lug that pulls all his pegs out. Ah, the bally idiot, you hear him mutter to himself. And then comes a savage howl, and away goes your side. You lay down the mallet and start to go around and tell him what you think about the whole business. And at the same time, he starts round in the same direction to come and explain his views to you. And you follow each other round and round, swearing at one another, until the tent tumbles down in a heap and leaves you looking at each other across its ruins. Then you both indignantly exclaim in the same breath, There you are! What did I tell you? Meanwhile, the third man, who has been bailing out the boat and who has spilled the water down his sleeve and has been cursing away to himself steadily for the last 10 minutes, wants to know what the thundering blazes you are playing at and why the blamed tent isn't up yet. The Year of Magical Thinking, published in 2005 by John Didion, is an account of the year following the death of the author's husband in 2003. The biggest lesson I got from this book is the uncertainty of life and future. You think you'll be cared for and surrounded by family, children, grandchildren in old age, but people die before you do, and you are left alone. John Didion's husband died in 2003 in his 70s, and her daughter died as well in 2005. And Didion lived another 18 years after her husband's death. 18 years is a long time. A newborn baby would have gone to university in that time. John Didion lived all those years without her husband or daughter. It's a sad thought. It's quite an anxious book to read, to look death in the face and to examine it so closely. But after putting the book down, I'm reminded not to take my family and friends for granted and to cherish each day of small things. I spent most of January wrestling with The Tempest, one of the most challenging Shakespeare plays I've come across so far. I'm glad to hear some of you agree that it is challenging. I made a video all about the play and my frustration. I'll put the link up because I really don't want to think about it or talk about the play itself anymore. However, we will spend some time talking about Hag-Seed. Hag-Seed is a retelling of The Tempest by Margaret Atwood. Felix is a theatre director at the top of his game, but is betrayed and becomes nobody. Felix takes a teaching job at a prison, and the inmates greatly appreciate Shakespeare and his teaching. When he hears that the traitors are coming to the prison for a visit, he plots a Tempest-worthy revenge. This is the second Shakespeare retelling I've read so far that has a theatre setting and the protagonist is a director. The first one was All's Well by Mona Awad, which is a retelling of All's Well That Ends Well. The protagonist in All's Well is a drama teacher in a school, putting on All's Well That Ends Well for the school show with a bunch of unwilling teenagers who much prefer Macbeth. The protagonist in Hag-Seed is a theatre director in a prison, teaching and producing The Tempest with a bunch of unconvinced inmates who also prefer Macbeth or Richard III or Julius Caesar. I liked comparing and contrasting them and thinking of the elements in common. I very much enjoyed reading Felix's teaching process. To get the inmates interested and to get them reading the play carefully, Felix asked them to list all the curses and swear words and sets the rule that they can pick a few and only swear with those. He introduces the play and the characters to his reluctant actors, and no one wants to play Ariel because Ariel is a fairy. How do you live it down in a prison after that? Felix breaks down the character and directs them to see Ariel in a new light, and ends up with a whole team of people working together to achieve Ariel. That's just one example. He goes through every character with the class, and I felt like I was sitting there with them. The analysis of the subtext is very insightful, especially as I really struggled with the Tempest myself. For example, according to Felix, there are 9 prisons in the Tempest. Can you identify them? It shows the production process as well. It's a bit like seeing the theatre work, the behind-the-scenes stuff, the discussion, and the teamwork. I don't want to spoil the story, so I won't say much, except it's very clever. For example, we just said there are 9 prisons in the Tempest. To put on a play that has so many prison images in an actual prison, I think that's clever. Felix is obviously Prospero in the novel. He's betrayed in real life, as in real life in the novel, but he's also Prospero in the play, in the prison. His roles in real life and in the play are identical. There are also characters in the novel whose roles in real life and in the theatre production do not overlap completely. The double identity is very clever too. I took 2 lecture series in January, one called The Iliad of Homer by Elizabeth Van Diver and one called The Art of Reading by Timothy Spurgeon. I don't know much about the lecturers. I think they are both university professors. One course is 6 hours and the other is 12.5 hours. Both are excellent and both are included in the Audible membership, which means I have free access. I find Audible membership really good value for money, more and more so. The course on Iliad is an introductory course, but it's a substantial introduction. I can't wait to start reading Iliad next month. The Art of Reading covers a lot of reading skills and techniques, which I have already put to use in reading and thinking about The Warden. The Warden is a novel by English author Anthony Trollope, published in 1855. The Warden in the title refers to Mr. Harding, a meek and elderly man who is the precentor of Barchester Cathedral, which is a bit like a music director today. He's also the overseer of a charitable house called Hiram's Hospital, where 12 lonely, aging and poor men live on the charity of an ancient legacy. The novel has a linear, straightforward narration, a small but varied cast. It's a perfect short novel to practice what I learned in the Art of Reading course. Everything is comfortable and peaceful at the beginning. Mr. Harding lives with his daughter quietly. He is very content with his role as the presenter of the cathedral because he loves music, and he very gladly does the job as the warden, looking after the welfare of the beadsmen, often playing music for their company and entertainment in the beautiful evening light. Then we have the destabilizing event. A young man called John Bold challenges the status quo. So what's his problem? Anthony Trollope spends a couple of chapters explaining the complicated historic situation regarding this legacy and the hospital. It's a bit clunky and it nearly lost me. Basically, the house, the land, and a sum of money are left by the will of a rich man from a few centuries ago to provide for the poor of the town. And the estate is under the management of a warden appointed by the cathedral authority. Each year, the income of the land increases, and by the time of our story, the warden receives a comfortable living from the land without doing much work, and he lives a genteel life, while the beadsman's income hasn't increased much, and they are still poor and low in social status. John Bold is a zealous man for social reform, and he challenges the injustice of the arrangement. Farewell to Mr. Harding's peace of mind and peaceful life. So far, what do you think? Who's right? I think John Bold is correct in challenging the injustice of the system and campaigning for more money and better life conditions for the poor. But to achieve that, Mr. Harding has to be turned out of his home, where he lived and loved for decades. And when Mr. Harding accepted the position and the income that comes with it years ago, he did it with a clear conscience. The previous warden received £800, and so did the one before that, and so did he. Then suddenly the money is now considered to be corrupt and dishonest, and the person who receives it is accused publicly of being corrupt and dishonest as well. Is that fair to old Mr. Harding, who has been nothing but kind to his bedesmen and treating them as friends? The author presents both sides of the argument so convincingly. I can see from both their perspectives and can't decide whose side I should be on. Where do you think the story will go? I won't spoil it. For such a short novel with a level narrative style, there are some surprisingly powerful moments, especially towards the end. Thomas C. Foster was one of my favorite teachers in 2022 because of how to read literature as a professor. I started 2023 with another book of his immediately, How to Read Poetry Like a Professor. I love the chapters on sense and sound and the chapter on symbols and images. I wish he talks more about symbols and images. However, I didn't enjoy it as much as How to Read Literature, and I think partly because I had such high expectations, partly because I'm a lot less familiar with poetry in general. For example, it's very interesting to hear about Coleridge and Edward Lear because I know something about them. But most of the poems and the poets he quotes and analyzes in the book, I have no idea who they are. The third reason I didn't enjoy the book as much is that I feel like he spends a lot of time talking about the rules and forms of poems. It gets technical and confusing. It also sounds a lot like math, which I'm terrible at. So I couldn't devour it like I did How to Read Literature. But having said that, he has made poetry a bit less intimidating. In passing comments, Foster also says William Blake and T.S. Eliot can be difficult for various reasons. It's such a comfort to know I wasn't being completely thick. Perhaps I just picked the challenging poets by accident. I started listening to Iliad halfway through January and contemplated the possibility of finishing it by the end of the month. But then I thought, I'm only going to read Iliad for the first time once. I am not going to rush it. So I've got the translation by E.V. Real and the audiobook of the same translation narrated by Steve John Shepherd, who is an English actor. I don't know him, but I approve of his voice. I'll definitely be reading Iliad in February. For Shakespeare, I haven't decided if I want to go straight into another play or read his biography or some other non-fiction about him. If I read a play, I'll be reading Titus Andronicus. I was so close to watching it in Globe's candlelit indoor playhouse in London, but my train is cancelled. Shakespeare's Globe has announced its plays for the summer season: A Midsummer Night's Dream, The Comedy of Errors, Macbeth, As You Like It, and The Tempest. I can start to add them onto my reading list accordingly. I have just read A Midsummer Night's Dream and watched 2 different productions last year, so I don't think I will be watching it again this year. I was quite surprised Globe is putting on A Midsummer Night's Dream again. It felt like it hasn't been very long since their last production. But then when I checked, the last one was actually in 2013, so it has been 10 years. The Comedy of Errors is brand new to me. I have read Macbeth and As You Like It and watched productions of both on screen at the start of my Shakespeare journey. I didn't dig very deep, so would love to read them again. The Tempest production is designed especially for young people. I don't know what that means, but would love to watch it on stage if there's an opportunity. That's all for today. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in my next one.